Hey guys, welcome to chapter 12, F. This is the last section in this chapter. We are going to talk about arthropods. Okay, so the phylum that we're going to be talking about is Arthropoda, and this actually has the most species in its phylum. And it's really cool because I guess you don't really think about it like the mollusca phylum, because you can't see the molluscas because they're mostly in the water. And just like that with the Arthropoda, there's a lot that you don't see because they're so small and they're all mostly insects. So the species that are part of this phylum have to do with pollinators like bees. They are, this is supposed to say decomposers. I don't know why I abbreviated. So these are decomposers. There's also crop eaters like locusts, and then there are also a lot that have diseases and carry parasites. So, not all of them are very helpful. Most of these animals that are part of this phylum, they do have an exoskeleton, meaning that they have a hard exterior, and they have an outer covering that helps to support them and protect the animal. They also have jointed appendages, so their legs, their antennae, they all have joints in them, so they're able to flex them appropriately, and then they also have muscles that are attached to these exoskeletons so that they can move. So there are a couple of major groups of arthropods that we're going to talk about. The first one is called class Insecta, and basically these species that are in this have three-part bodies, and they have 3 pairs of legs, so usually 6, 2 pairs of wings, so usually about 4 wings, and then they can live in freshwater or they can live on land, which is terrestrial. So examples of these are beetles, flies, mosquitoes, bees, ants, butterflies, grasshoppers, and cockroaches. The second phylum is called the subphylum Crustacea, and basically the animals that are part of this are longer. They have segmented body with 1 pair of legs per segment, and then they are also terrestrial, so they live on land. And an example of these are centipedes. So if you remember looking at a centipede, with each segment in their body, they usually have 2 legs that are coming out on either side. And then we have the class Diplopoda, which basically is also similar to the last one. It's long, segmented body with 2 pairs of legs per segment. They're also terrestrial, and examples of these are millipedes. And then you have class Arachnidia. You've heard of these for arachnids, which are spiders. So they have 2-part body with 4 pairs of legs, which means they have 8. And then they can spin silk. They can be in freshwater or terrestrial. So these examples are like spiders, scorpions, ticks, and mites. Okay, so let's talk about a typical body of an insect. So insects are going to be mainly part of arthropods, and they're going to have 3 sections in their bodies. They're going to have the head, they're going to have the thorax, and then they're going to have the abdomen. So if you look at the picture that I have on this slide, you can see where the head is, which contains their eyes, their antenna, their mouth. Then you have their thorax, which is like their upper body part, which has usually the legs. And then they have the abdomen, which is towards the back end of the insect. And they usually have about 6 legs in total, 3 on each side. So a fly is probably one of the only invertebrates that there's typical insects that are in this phylum that can fly, right? And so they usually have 2 pairs of wings, and not all of them may have that. Some of them may only have 1 pair of wings, and some of them might not have any wings at all. But they usually, animals that such as flies, they have compound eyes, which means that they can see a bajillion things at one time. And if you look at the picture that I have, you can see that the fly has almost these tiny pixelated things on their eyes, which allows them to see so many different images and so many different things at one time, and they can take in all of that information. And that's probably why it's really hard to catch a fly, because they're so observant. So here is an example of one of the animals, which is a field cricket. You probably see this a lot in the summertime, and you hear them definitely a lot in the summertime. But you can see that this animal has their head. You can see that they have their thorax, which is that middle part, and you can see some legs are coming out of the thorax, and then you can also see that they have their abdomen, which is the end of the animal. And then you can also see that the crickets also have some form of compound eye, so that they can receive a lot of information from their surroundings as well. Now we have the ant. The ant also has a similar layout. It has the head, it has the thorax, and then it has the abdomen. The head is containing the antenna, the eyes, the mouth. The thorax has the legs, and then the abdomen has a stinger. Some ants do have stingers on them, which can be pretty painful. Alright, so let's talk about a grasshopper. A grasshopper has blood, and they also have a circulatory system. So the blood that they have is basically fluid tissue, like you and I have, and this is able to carry substances to all of the parts of the body of the grasshopper. Their circular system also contains blood vessels and the heart, both of which make up the circulatory system. And the heart is going to pump blood to all of the body's cells, just like ours does. So it's super important. The grasshopper's heart actually has many sections in it, and it's located right on the back of it, right under their exoskeleton. And the blood is going to enter the heart through two different slits that it has. And when the heart is contracting, the slits close, and then the blood is going to be pumped forward through an artery. So it's kind of cool how their heart is obviously a little bit different than ours, but how it functions to still do pretty much the same thing that our hearts do for us, which is pumping blood throughout their entire body. So as the blood is pumped through the artery, once the heart contracts, the blood is going to flow out of the organs. It's going to flow out of the artery and into all of the organs. And as the blood is flowing through over the organs, it's going to pick up any digested food, and it's also going to absorb substances and take them to places where they are needed to be used. The blood is also going to pass through small places around the organs and make sure that they're covered, and then return to the heart. The cool thing about a grasshopper is that they do have an open circulatory system, which is what allows the blood to flow over the organs and such. So it's not going to remain inside just the blood vessels. When we talked about the earthworms, we talked about how they have a closed circulatory system, but in grasshoppers they have an open circulatory system, so it doesn't remain just in the blood vessel itself. So here it's kind of blurry, but you can see that the grasshopper on the left, how it has an open circulatory system. So you can see that after the blood gets pumped through the heart, it can actually exit the blood vessels that are located right here. But if you look on the right, you have the earthworm and you have the heart, and once the blood pumps through the heart, it continues to remain inside of the blood vessels, which is right here, and then continues to make its way back to the heart. The blood of the grasshopper is colorless. If you've ever, stepped on one or killed one, you can probably be like, oh, I don't see any red, it must not have blood. But, blood can come in different colors depending on the animal. So the blood is colorless for the grasshopper, and it's important. The blood is important because it's going to carry a lot of food and waste for the grasshopper, and it doesn't carry a lot of oxygen for the grasshopper like ours does, which is interesting. But what happens is the oxygen that's received and the carbon dioxide that is released by the animal is actually going to be done through the trachea. And the trachea is basically tiny tubes that are elasticy that pretty much go throughout the insect. And air is going to be pumped in and out of these tubes through something called spiracles throughout the entire insect. So you can see over here that the trachea is this kind of like, tubes that are going throughout the entire grasshopper. So you can see it's literally going through the entire body. And then it has spiracles, which are these little openings, like right here, and right here, that also help with the movement of gases. Grasshoppers are sadly destroyed by a lot of insecticides. I mean, sadly to some, I guess. And what happens is usually when the insecticide is sprayed, it enters the trachea, which is their breathing, and it will dissolve into the insect's blood. And the blood also collects the waste that like we talked about, and they get filtered out through excretory tubules, which then pass into the intestines and then out of the body with any materials that they might have digested that are indigestible. So pretty much saying when the insecticides get into their blood, the blood is moving throughout the entire animal, so the entire animal pretty much gets infected by the insecticide, so they die. But the blood also is helpful in removing any waste or undigested materials throughout the intestine so that they can be deposited out of the animal. So insects also go through something called metamorphosis. Probably the most common metamorphosis you probably learned about is the butterfly, going from a caterpillar to a cocoon into a beautiful butterfly. And basically what a metamorphosis is a change in the body form. So the animal is changing in the way that it looks. And usually they do this by going through something called molting. And molting is basically when an insect is going to shed their old exoskeletons or their exterior cover, and then they will be replaced with new ones. There is something called an incomplete metamorphosis, which basically means that an insect is going to look the same each time it molts. And what happens is that it starts out as an egg and it goes through a series of molts. And then the animal, and each time they molt, will start to get bigger and bigger. There is a stage called the nymphs, which is basically a developing stage, which become adults. So you go from a nymph to an adult, and then once you reach the adult age, you are able to reproduce. So you can see that we have an egg here. That egg in about 2 weeks will turn into something called a nymph, and then about 4 to 7 weeks it will go through a bunch of molting phases, which can happen from a couple days to a couple weeks, and it will become an adult. Okay, so in a complete metamorphosis, you have 4 stages. You have stage 1, which is the egg, stage 2, which is a larva, stage 3, which is a pupa, and then stage 4 was the adult. So let's talk about what these stages mean. So when you have an egg, basically it's going to be fertilized by a sperm, and that will grow into a larva. This larva is the most active of the stages. Larvae of moths and butterflies are typically seen as caterpillars, and when they're in this stage, they eat everything. They eat so much because they are building up strength and energy that they need before they go into their pupa stages. In their pupa stage, it's called their resting stage. So the larva is going to use the food that it was consuming like crazy, and it's going to use that food to change into the adult insect. And so in a moth, it's going to enter a cocoon, and butterflies will enter something called chrysalis, which kind of, is also sometimes referred to as a cocoon. So here you can see a monarch butterfly. It starts off with the egg, and then you have the caterpillar at this stage, which is also the larva stage. It's going to be eating a lot of food. Then it will form into the chrysalis, which means it will be using all of the food that it ate to help it turn into an adult butterfly. Okay, So an insect that goes through complete metamorphosis is also going to molt as it passes from one stage to another. Butterflies obviously do look different every time it molts. Like, it looks different from a larva to as it goes into the cocoon and then once it comes out. So it is very interesting to see the different stages that they go through. Let's talk about some bees. So on page 269 in your textbook, if you want to read this, it actually gives you a lot more insight, and it's a very interesting read. But basically, there are over 200,000 species of bees in the world, which is kind of really crazy if you think about it. And only about 5% of those species are actually social insects, so they live in colonies and interact with one another. And the honeybee is the only insect that humans actually cultivate in large colonies, and to get honeys and stuff like that. So in the bee, they are actually pretty complex in that they have societies, and they have 3 distinct levels. The first level is the queen bee, which you probably heard of, and this is the only fertile female in the hive, so that means this is the only bee that's actually reproducing. Then you have bees that are called the drones, and these bees are male bees, and they are the only ones that are allowed to fertilize the female, which is the queen. So, which is really cool. And then you have workers, and these are usually females that have stingers rather than reproductive organs, so they can't actually reproduce. And they have kind of different jobs. So they can be a nurse aides for the babies that are being produced by the queen bee. They can be builders to help build their hives. They can maintain the comb or the hive, and they provide nectar and pollen so that they can make the honey. So that's pretty much it for this section. If you guys have any questions, please do email me, or you can read in your textbook. Your textbook is really great for plenty of information. All my slides are usually just a brief overview, and I hope you guys enjoyed chapter 12.